Welcome back. Now let's take a look at Module 2 together. Now this one is all about managing the flow of work in DevOps. Now, we know that Tailwind Traders is starting to go all in on DevSecOps. They've studied it, they've attended training sessions on DevSecOps. They 100% believe that this is the way going forward. And in the last session, getting started with DevOps, Tailwind Traders have even decided on the tooling stack. Now, they're ready to start DevOpsing. Now we'll update our understanding of DevSecOps in this module to another level. It is the culture of integrating and automating preventive, detective, and responsive security controls into the pipeline. But before that, a refresh on why is DevOps and DevSecOps so important. We'll talk more about shifting security left in Module 3. But believe it or not, your competitors are already doing DevOps or DevSecOps. It will help you to increase velocity, reduce downtime, and reduce human error. But how? In essence, DevOps or DevSecOps is all about the mindset. Your customers might not know what they really want, but when you get it right, you can be very cost effective. And DevOps is all about helping you to get it right. Now, the mindset of getting right is encapsulated from the term agile. Now, agile comes from Agile Manifesto, a manifesto created by a bunch of engineers who wanted to work on the issues they saw in software development. The manifesto claims things like, we value working software over perfect documents and change our plan. You get the idea. Some common elements in Agile include user stories. It can be a feature, issue fix, bug fix, anything that looks like to-do for a developer. But it needs to be something that delivers value to the user. It is implementable and can be estimated. Then we have something called as backlog, which is a list of user stories, a team's to-do list. Then we have a PO, a product owner, a person who's responsible for software product, and often the person who gathers and writes the stories. And then our team, the engineers, the designers, the business analysts. Now back to the slide. A very popular framework in Agile is the Scrum. Now in Scrum, we have development cycle of 1 to 4 weeks. The cycle is called sprint. For example, the product owner will gather the stories and maintain the backlog at the same time. Now at the start of each sprint, we start with a sprint planning meeting, where we pick stories from the backlog. Then the team works on these stories for the rest of the sprint. Also, each day, we often start with a daily or a daily stand-up, where everyone gets together to report on the progress and exchange ideas. Short and compact. At the end of each sprint, we do a retrospective to see how we did in the last sprint and where we can improve. Unfinished stories go into the next sprint, together with new stories. By the way, in Scrum, we have another role called Scrum Main or Scrum Master. It's a person who coaches the team and sees if they're doing Agile and Scrum correctly. Now, working in Agile is really exciting and refreshing, but some general principles to remember by. Your product is built incrementally. Do not expect everything to be perfect at once. And this understanding needs to be shared by business and development. You need to maintain transparency. The product owner and backlogs are meant to be transparent. Do not be ashamed to show a half-done product to your PO or stakeholders, or even users, because Agile is all about we get the feedback and we improve from there. In Agile, the team is meant to be self-organizing and cross-functional. So it should be easy for you as a developer to just go right up to a product owner and strike up a conversation like, can we redesign this button? Because the original design will take a day, but after redesign, I can finish it in an hour. And it will provide the same value to the user. Now the product owner, the team, and the Scrum Master are just titles. Whatever someone does in the team is what they came to do, as a balance between what they can do and what is needed. But even if you're going to go faster and trying to be more down to earth, quality is still non-negotiable. And as you know, in development, we are always trying to strike the right balance between better quality, less time, and more features. But in Agile, we do this in every development cycle. Example, the developer are recommending some changes to the code, which takes up a whole week, because there's some security risk associated with the current framework. But the software product will look same to the user, even after we change it. So do you delay the scheduled release for this? Do you reduce the other features to prioritize this? Or do you compromise on quality, choosing to ignore what the developer just said? Now, this is an issue often seen in development. The value of quality almost seems to be invisible until things go wrong. Now, say if we stick to quality, now how can you work towards the correct delivery date? You may think we need accurate estimates. Well, there's no such thing as accurates on estimates. In sprint planning, developers estimate the stories to see how much time or effort each story will take them for finishing. Now, this is a challenging process. Even experienced developers cannot be sure how long it will take them to finish something. A simple rule is that anything within 4-hour task frame can be relatively accurate. That's basically like a morning, afternoon, or evening. Now, trying to chop up backlog items into chunks of 4 hours seems rather efficient. But also, you do not want to pile those chunks up to more than 4 units of 4 hours. So like 2 days. Anything of a task length that size for more than 2 days out? Oh, that's risky. And it's moving too close to assuming and guesswork. That is why experienced DevOps professionals have recommended to not think of estimation by counting back from a date. Example, we need to finish this by Christmas. Now, this is going to be a disaster. On the contrary, if you do it right, estimation can give you more accuracy and helps different developers to work in parallel. Now, these rules apply to everyone equally, which is another reason why Agile works. Everyone has a common goal which the users value, and we do not value one single person's voice more than the other, even if it's the CEO. And this also helps to prevent top-down decision making, which leads to bad design, bad execution, or big disasters in the end. Now, another classic Agile tool that we've not mentioned yet is the Kanban boards. The original form was done as a board of sticky notes. The vertical lanes are mapped to different stages in a workflow. Example, backlog, to do, doing, done. Horizontal lanes do not always exist, but if they do, they can be mapped to different emergency levels or different workload. Example, front end, back end. And they can be often color-coded to show a story time. Example, reds can be bug, yellow can represent a feature. For example, the Azure board in Azure DevOps is a Kanban board tool. It allows you to create something called a Scrum board or Agile board other than the Kanban board, which are used for other purposes like planning. Now, all these boards together will help you to track work issues and code defects which are associated with your project. Now, let's look at it in a quick demo. Now, as the project of Tailwind Traders, I can manage the backlog by adding new work items into it. Or maybe I could validate current items in the backlog already. What you see here is the current product backlog for our website development project. Now, to add a new work item, I just need to click on New Work Item and adding something new into my product backlog. So it could start as a customer. I want to get a notification on my mobile. Now, it's been added to the top of the list. But based on, for example, priorities within your DevOps team, I could move this around wherever I want. Now, as a development team, you can decide on the different items. So we could grab up an example of like top 5 or maybe top 10 items. So let's say top 10 tasks. Then we're going to work on the specific sprint. I could also move certain backlog items into another sprint. And as you can see, some items were already moved into that sprint, and it's immediately going to tell you like, hey, watch out, this is not really working. So you cannot really move anything into the wrong direction. Now the backlog is really awesome in getting view on open items as well as prioritize them. And that's the order column form. But it's really not showing the active ongoing work that is happening. Now, what you can do from here is, for example, immediately getting a view on all the tasks related to a specific backlog item. You can add a new task from here. So let's go back to that first item where it is going to show us a really detailed overview of what we need to enter for a specific task, something to work on. I could change the state and I could also assign this to somebody from my team to work on, and I'm going to save my changes. I could actually do the same, for example, create a report on an integration of my box directly, again, back to the backlog item. Now, bug to fix, assigning it to someone, and from there, and it is going to show us the exact same thing now. It is really that easy. So you can always go back. If I go back into my main backlog item down here, it's still going to keep track of all related work and related bug that somebody needs to work on. And if you've already assigned it to someone, then obviously it's immediately getting noticed by that person. Now, this is all from the developer team, right? Now, what if you have a broader team of stakeholders, like the business, that wants to get a view of status of your project? That's where we have Kanban boards. So let's move to Kanban boards here. Now, Kanban boards are literally a visual representation of all items that your team is working on. The board is completely customizable. Like for instance, what I did is adding an emergency swim lane, and that's immediately getting noticed by our developer teams. Easy said. If some backlog item or a task is showing up on that emergency lane, it means that our teams are literally dropping everything, and that's like the first prioritized task for them, and they're going to start working on it. Another really cool thing a year out of boards is direct integration with source control, for example, GitHub. So let's switch to my source code environment for a second, where my code is stored in GitHub. And just to keep it easy, you could probably do this from a more complete editor like Visual Studio or VS Code, or any other development environment. But let me quickly make a change in my README file. It doesn't need to be the README file, just an easy example. And I'm going to edit something up here. Now, when I'm changing, I obviously need to provide a commit message. So I'm going to tell Peter, updated, and I don't even need to mention that I did it because it's obviously already having my user account information. So updated the README. Right now, I can do AB for Azure boards, and I can directly link it to a work item. So I could pick up a work item. Let's say 1928 looks a good one, providing description. Now let me create a new branch once this commit message is gone. Now you can immediately see that here. It's adding an octocat, which means that, hey, there's something related to GitHub happening here, right? So if we drill down on the details and clicking on this little octocat, you can see that now there's a deep link. So it's not just showing me like the first couple of words out of my commit message, but it allows me as a deep link to redirect back and validate all the changes. Now, since we created a new branch, let's maybe close this off and finish with a pull request. So I could create my pull request. Once my pull request is created, let's check back. And bam, within a second, it's immediately going to recognize it on the Azure DevOps side. And my board backlog item is immediately getting updated. The last thing I want to show you is closing my item. I don't need this anymore. So what if all the changes from updating the source code were complete? And I'm going to merge and confirm the merge. Guess what happens? This is getting recognized in boards and immediately moving that items into the finished, or I would say officially the done column. So I can check back. Nice integration, work items, sprints, tasks related to work items, moving them back into backlog. And from there, a nice integration with GitHub commit message. GitHub pull request and merging pull request and nicely closing. Now let's talk about another element in DevOps workflow, the branching strategy. Now, if you remember a branch represents one version of work in progress in your Git code base. It is completely up to you and your team to decide how to branch. And the branching strategy will make sure you do not get into trouble when multiple team members are working in parallel. A traditional branching strategy is shown here. The stable branch is the main. Maybe it also maps to the current version that is working in production. Development is the ongoing working branch when new changes are pulled into before they go into main. Now, when a developer wants to work on something, they create a new branch of their own, often called as feature branch. And once they're done, they merge them back into development, which eventually gets merged into main. And as you can imagine, you don't want to merge two pull requests in development at the same time. What you want to do is you want to merge changes from feature A first and then feature B. Now that's how we keep things tidy. Now an alternative to this is a trunk-based workflow. There's no development branch here. Instead, you create small temporary working branches, something called as topic branch. They get merged back into main easily and immediately once the developer finishes working on them. Now do not nod your head too early. Let's see how it works. What if you're not ready to show some of the features to your users? Do you keep the feature branch unmerged until you're ready to show them to your users? Probably not. You don't have to do that. To solve this problem, you can use something called as feature flags. Now, feature flag is something you can use to toggle between new features. If you turn something off, they won't be shown to the end users. Now think of feature flag as glorified if statement. For example, we just added a new beta page, but you only want it to be shown to certain users. Now when we code the page, the beta page, we can add a flag that says if user group property is set to beta, return the value true. If not, return the value false. This true-false value will be then used as a flag to decide either we show the beta page or not. As a result, for example, Bob has a group beta in his user profile, so he will see the beta page, while Sarah, who is part of group normal, will not see that page. Now really, it's just an if statement that depends on either the feature flag returns true or not. If true, we do the new behavior. Example, show a new page, show a new feature. And if not, we just keep doing the old behavior. So the changes will not impact to the users who should not see it. Now, you might think, what is the use of all this? Sometimes in testing, we do something called as A/B testing, in which some of the visitors see version A and some see version B. Example, 50% see A and 50% see B. We collect the metrics. Example, the conversion rate, which is how many switched over to the new feature. Now, in the example, variation A has a higher conversion rate. So maybe we want to keep A and lose B. Now this can be easily done through feature flags. Now when we do a safe deployment of a new feature, sometimes we do a soft launch. Now soft launch is basically gradually rolling out changes while collecting feedback. For example, you plan to change the UI by adding a button and changing the tab layout. In soft launch, you may release by adding the button and then collect feedback, then change the tab layout and then collect the feedback, which is why it is an incremental rollout. Now this can also be supported by feature flag. You can add all the features in one PR, but then turn them on or off using flags. One deployment, multiple releases. Now it is easy to roll back using feature flags. You just need to switch the flag to off and the new feature or the new behavior will immediately go away. Now time for a quick demo. So we talked about trunk development using feature flags, allowing any developer to still provide value to the users without having long-running pull requests. There is a lot of different ways to integrate feature flags into your code using the already mentioned if-else, or maybe relying on the third-party tools, or why not embracing a new feature in Azure called Azure App Configuration. So what we are going to do here is add a new feature flag to show a new product category, kitchen, here in the product menu. Because still, when Tailwind traders want to start selling kitchens to customers anytime soon, Azure App Configuration is an Azure App Service allowing you to centrally store application configuration settings, which can be shared across different applications running in Azure or elsewhere. You start with deploying this app configuration service. From there, you can use it as an overall configuration explorer. I got one example is just using a generic dev test SQL admin user account. So that's not really a secret, right? But the other nice thing that you could also integrate it with, for example, more secretly information out of the key vault. Now you could update your application to read out keys from configuration manager and at the same time pulling secrets from key vault. But what you can do this way is just using the app configuration approach and centralizing how you're gonna connect to it. For now, let's focus on the second capability of configuration. That's the feature manager. And that's literally the only feature flag option we're going to use. And it's like the only thing you need, right? So developers can easily enable this. And they can also monitor metric. If let's say you've got a couple of weeks running your application in like a test environment, or you've got some users connecting to it and they don't really use the feature, or they don't like it, or maybe you don't want to offer kitchens anymore, then you disable this feature flag. And that's all it takes. You don't have to update the code, although I would recommend you to clean up your code as well. So let's add a new feature, a key in our feature manager, and we are going to call kitchen. You can add a specific label into it. You can add some custom feature flag names, but I'm going to keep this quite easy for now, and let's immediately enable it as well. Applying it, saving it, and it's getting activated just like that. From here, we can switch back to our development environment and show you what it takes to update your source code. First of all, you install a feature management pack for ASP.NET Core. From there, you're going to update like 3-4 core files in your application, and that's all. So the first option here in my view, import, that's where you're going to point to Microsoft Feature Management. That's the one. Next, you add in our program file. We're going to add like 4-5 lines of code. And here we point to reading out the connection string. Now what we need is a connection string from our application to connect to App Configuration Manager, similar to connecting to SQL database, Cosmos database. So nothing's really different here. And we're going to highlight that we're going to use feature flags. We're almost there. Last part we need to add is pointing to, obviously using this feature management service. From here, it means that our application is almost ready to start recognizing this feature management integration. Now I told you about 2 different ways to actually integrate it, what I can call the front end and later on the back. The front end is pretty easy. That's where we go onto our menu layout, and that's the little top menu we have with all our different options currently being shown. We've got home, gardening, decor, kitchen, accessories, and so on and so on. Now we can use this feature names section or calling out this block where we're going to call in feature kitchen. Again, feature is already enabled, which means that from here, my application comes up, it's going to read out the key state in feature manager. And based on enable or disable, it's going to publish that menu or not. The second option we have is working a little bit more on the back end. So what I did here is creating a new controller for my kitchen, where I'm telling, hey, I want you to recognize feature manager. And based on that, just call the feature manager functionality in Azure App Configuration. And from there, by using this feature gate, I am going to tell like reach out to feature flag, call kitchen. And again, based on enable or disable, it's actually going to show you that menu or not. That's literally what it takes. But there's one last thing I want to show you from where we can make this even more granular. So from the editing options of my kitchen, key and value, I can enable features. What I can do with feature filter is allocating this feature state enabled or disabled to a specific set, for example, users or specific group, maybe based on Azure AD authentication, where you're going to allow users to sign in with any web authentication, user account that they already have, and from there showing that feature maybe from some users and maybe not all of them. Now the default is if you just enable it, it is 50, which means that 50% of the calls to the web page will actually display the kitchen option. And for the other 50%, it obviously won't display. There's one last update that you need to do in your startup. I commented it out for now, but it would add an additional service or updating if that's like the only feature you're going to use. Add feature management, and then add feature filter pointing to the percentage filter. In my scenario, Tailwind traders learned about feature flags and how a combination of Azure App Configuration, Feature Manager, and only a few lines of code allows them to quickly, easily, but also safely integrate new features into the application. And if really needed, removing them in the exact same easy way. Let's move on with the last part of the flow of work scenario. Now, another one of our concern is how to maintain quality while merging pull requests. We'll talk more about quality control and test in Module 3. For now, let's say traditionally when we merge a PR, team or a product owner can just run the changes on their local machine, take a short look at the code, and say it looks good to me. But is it really good enough? Definitely no. Now, automation can help you to run some tests when you need a quality check. You can set those up in something called as a pipeline. We'll talk more about pipelines in Module 3 and Module 4. For now, just remember the word pipeline. Now, another important topic is infrastructure as a code. Now, infrastructure as a code means to document infrastructure-related thing, example, template for the cloud resource used in your project, which is used in your code base. Now, before going there, let's talk a little bit about Bicep. What is Bicep? Now, Bicep is an Azure feature. On Azure, we have something called as ARM template, which is a template file written in JSON. You can use ARM template to specify configurations of a cloud resource used in your project. Bicep is the newer and more powerful version of ARM template. It seeks to solve the main pain points many developers were facing with ARM templates. Example, the fact that ARM template tends to get really long and really complicated. The syntax looks like what you see on the slide. Notice it is more like an actual code instead of JSON, which is more like a pure data format. Now, biceps comes with its own syntax, but it's easy to learn and follow. Old concepts from ARM template like scope, parameter, variables are still there. We've also added some new features so you can write loops, conditional deployments, multi-line strings, and refer to cloud resources really easily. Now, time for a quick demo. All right, so I'm going to do in this demo is I'm going to show you how bicep works with GitHub Actions and GitHub Secrets. So the first thing that we're going to do here, which we've already done, is to create a resource group that's called bicep. And we're going to use this later. And we'll keep track of this subscription ID. This is going to be used as well. Actually, all this exercise you can find on AZ400 part. And if you look under something called implement bicep, and there's something called an exercise deploy bicep file from GitHub workflows. Do you notice that you have to follow through all these exercises before that to reach at this stage? So if you just look at this one by itself, it won't work. But for us, we are going to just show what's going to happen in this demo specifically. So the first thing that we're going to do here is to create something called a service principal in Azure. And we are going to have to use this command over here. And we have to change the subscription ID to ours. So what we're going to do is just copy and paste this. And I'm going to go to Azure. And then I'm going to change my subscription ID. So this is going to create a service principal, which is an identity that I use to log in from over GitHub to from one Azure to another Azure resource, or from one application to another Azure resource. So as you can see here right now, this is trying to create a contributor row for me, which I can use. The next thing is what I'm going to do is I'm going to remember these and the JSON file that I can use later on. Now, when I create a GitHub secret, so the GitHub secret is going to use these login authentication information when it tries to reach Azure. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go over to GitHub and create that secret. So here, as you can see, we've actually created a repo and secret locates. If you go into settings and scroll down a little bit and go to secret and go to action. So there are different types of secret that you can use for different type of things. Action secret is the type that you use in actions, such as create a new repository secret. So the first thing that we want to do is create something called as Azure credentials. And for this one, we are going to put this thing and just in there. So all the credentials that we had, credentials, just making sure that I haven't spelled them wrong. Looks good. Right, and then actually it also needs the resource group name and the subscription ID. So we are going to create that as well. Under our resource group, which is also called bicep. And we also need one for subscription. Make sure you don't type that one wrong. And for this one, we're just going to add in subscription ID that we have copied right there. Right, so now we have a free secret and these are going to be used once our action starts running. Now we're going to go over to create an actual action. So that locates in the action menu from the repo. And as you can see here previously, we've actually had some belts, some previous run when I test this and now we can just go to look at the one that I've already created and we can just create a new workflow. I think that would work as well. Just copy this whole thing and create something called a simple workflow. Or create it yourself. So you can use those templates or you can use something that you build on your own. And as you can see here in the action, this is going to run on Ubuntu and this is going to check out the main. And then it's going to run that with that secret that we just created. So it's going to reuse those information to connect to Azure. And it's going to try to find this Azure subscription ID and the specific resource group. Also, what it's going to do is it's going to use something called as bicep template, which is something that we have already built early on. But let's just commit this for now. And you can leave any commit message that you like. Change that. and commit that. And as you can see, this is just going to add that yum file into your repo, right? So once you actually commit it, this is going to start automatically start running. Now what's next? What's the next thing that we want to do? We've already done all this committing. Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to go over that bicep file that we were using and take a look at it. So we said that we have already created this previously, but what does it do really, right? So this one is trying to create an Azure storage account in the resource group that we've pointed to, which is the bicep resource group. And as you can see here, using some parameters, the bicep has its own syntax. So as you can see here, parameter is defined in the param variable, and it has also something called variable as well, and it's very easy to learn. And as you can see here, the next thing that we define here is something called as resource. And we've also put all the file part that we usually put into our area template over here. As you can see, the SKU, the location, the kind, the property. We are also using other things like such as storage prefix, the location, and so on as the parameter or as a variable, which helps us to easily write up this documentation. But at the end of the day, it's just simply creating a storage account. All right, so let's go over to action. And as you can see, our last run just succeeded. This is based on a commit called create main yam. And if you go in there, you can actually see the run history. And you can see the first thing that it's setting up the job. And then it's running the action over there. And then it's logging into Azure based on the instruction we wrote in the action. And Azure login was successful. Then it deploys, right, using the template. And then it runs some post action if there are any. And then finally the job is completed. Now let's go to Azure and see what actually happened over there. Right, previously you've seen that we just got this service principal. But what should happen here is that previously, as you can see, that bicep resource group was blank. Now we get a newly deployed storage account, which was done through GitHub Actions. And if you go over to the activity log, you can see here, yeah, right there. Now, as you can see, we have created a row assignment and we have updated resource group. We have also listed up a storage account key, but this was done during the duration of the demo. Now, our Tailwind traders are doing so much better. Let's recap what we've learned. Our problem was to how to manage work, manage source code changes, automate. Now we know that they can manage their project using Agile and Scrum, use Kanban boards to visualize progress, use the trunk-based development strategy to simplify branching, use things like feature testing or feature flags to help them do A/B testing or soft launches, use GitHub Actions and infrastructure as a code. We still have some more concerns, which we'll talk about in the next module. We come to an end of module 2 now, and I'll see you after a quick break.